Good morning. Thank you for joining us this morning and for waking up early enough to be here. These slides stay up here for 15 seconds. That one didn't, though. He's Joby. I'm Scott. We're here from BP Logix. Last time I was here, last time I presented 2 years ago, we talked about process timeline. This is what a process timeline planned versus actual running process looks like. Process timeline, we're going to talk about it more in a minute, but as you can see, is not a bpmN style, not a sort of traditional flowchart style or Visio style way to model processes. We're going to find out why that's good right now. That's good because among other reasons, because in process timeline, everything wants to run right now. Every activity wants to run right now, but they won't. They have to wait for three things. They have to wait for precedence, eligibility, and necessity. What does precedence mean? Precedence means that there are certain things that have to get done before I'm done. So in this example, you see that you have to have an office before you can put a desk in it, before you can put a PC on the desk, right? So this is a simple example. You can have any number of predecessors. Eligibility. Okay, my predecessors are complete. Is it time for me to run? Well, I don't know yet. There might be other conditions. We call these sometimes start when conditions. So am I eligible to run? So if I'm not eligible yet, even if my predecessors are complete, I'm not going to run yet. That's a continuous evaluation. Once I am eligible, then the activity says, oh, gee, okay, I'm eligible. Do you need me? Right? So just because I'm eligible now doesn't mean you need me. This is a one-time decision. So think of eligibility, constantly evaluate it, and then a one-time decision for necessity, and then moving on. You can mix and match these things. Obviously, they're not mutually exclusive in any way. So here, for example, you have, I'll show you later because I don't have time to go in detail on the slide, but you have a mixture of those different kinds of conditions. Remember, everything wants to run all the time. If you look at, and we talked about case, or we're going to talk some more about case, if you look at the architecture of this, it's the things that you might expect, case sitting on process, everything else, these ruled KPIs, and then a whole bunch of different drivers that make those things happen. Because it's not traditional flow, and it's certainly not separate case from process model. That'd be insane. We have tied all those things together for you. So what does that give you in terms of those three axes I talked about? Number one, time, right? Process timeline is predictive because we can show you that in a minute, but it is. And efficient because, again, everything that can be running right now is running. The flow, sort of more traditional flow style, also built into process timeline and into these cases because it's very easy to do repeatable, iterative, rules-driven, type process. But it is just at the same time easy to use the same model as I've been arguing for years, and we're going to show it to you today, to do more event-driven or human decision-driven or event-driven kinds of cases. With me so far? Okay, 15 seconds, right? We're going to do college admissions today just as a little demo. Why did we pick college admissions besides that I could show a picture of my alma mater where I met my beautiful wife? Because it has some of these features that I want to share with you, right? So in terms of college admissions, there's parts of it that are time components, right? Everybody has deadlines. I don't know if you have kids in college, but if your application's not in on time, they'll talk to you next year maybe, but you're done for this year. In terms of workflow, there's traditional workflow like just completing the application or traditional review and approval. Does this person get in or not, right? So some traditional workflow. And then finally, of course, there's a lot of sort of case style modeling going on in this kind of thing because it's like human decisions drive so much of the action in the college admission process. So what we're hoping to do is show you a little bit of all of these things. I realize we're not going to try and show you this whole product in half an hour, but anybody who has 12 hours, give me a call. Anytime, we're happy to do it. This is where you can find us online. In real life, you can find us in San Diego County, so come visit, give us a call. Okay, so are we ready for the actual fun part of this? Okay, see, I didn't even have 20 slides. This is how much I care about you people. You don't need to sit here and watch my slides all day. So I'm going to introduce this a little bit. Mostly I'm going to let Joby do some of the talking, and then when Joby has to type or click, then I'll do some talking so that he can do that without distraction. But we're going to show you a little bit of this college admissions process. This process is pre-built. We're not going to build a whole college admissions, and I call it process, but this college admissions application, it's actually a pretty sizable application. We're going to show you one part of it, and we're going to show you what it takes to build in a little extra functionality where I'm going to make my candidates a special offer if they help me out. So this is our content list. This is where the various pieces of the application live, and we collected all the stuff for this demo in one folder, so we're not bouncing around too much. Where do we want to start? We're going to start with the process.
Maybe just a quick description. I'm Joby. So we're going to show you a few different things, but just to give you kind of some context, there's a lot of different objects that we're going to touch on and that we're going to talk about. So there's layers of. There's a data virtualization layer, there's rules, so there's a couple of different components. I'm going to kind of run through them pretty quick just so you can see kind of how they fit together. So we're going to put together just a couple of example extensions to a particular process and validation just so you have a feel for how some of those objects are used. But we're not going to go into too much detail as far as how each is created. Maybe start with touching on just the goal. So one of the things that you'll see, the concept of a goal. A goal is the ability to be able to define some type of target, some type of KPI, some type of objective. Sometimes it's a negative goal, sometimes a positive goal, and that can be used in conditions. It can be used also to drive actions, to drive a process. For this particular example, what we're going to do is, and again, trying to stay within kind of the concept of the pieces that Scott had just talked about, I'm going to go ahead and extend some of this process. I'm going to add some activity. So what this is actually the process model. So I'm building the model within here. I'm extending the process. I'm going to put some of that information in now, and this, hopefully I'll be able to capture a few of the different things that he had just talked about. So I'm going to go through and start adding different activities to this one, and then maybe Scott, while I start typing, I'll let you explain what I'm doing.
Yeah, good. So while we're talking about that, and it's covered for the moment, we'll get back to it. Imagine this as one of the process instances that might run as part of this case, right? As part of this admissions process. And this is something where what we call the oversee submission. So there's some general sort of submission oversight, right? You want to perform when you receive an application. And so we'll show you a couple of the options. And what we're going to do now is build this thing in that says, oh, by the way, my job as an admissions officer isn't just that I'm going to be screening these things. I also have to encourage people to apply. So I'm going to check my application rates. I'm going to check and make sure I'm meeting my goals as time goes on. And if not, I'm going to make people some offers that help them do that. So, Joe, do you want to describe the condition that the start when condition and what you did?
So on this, I've defined a particular activity. For this one, I'm going to start really a subsegment or a segment within the process, this request referral. I'm going to add a couple of other activities or tasks. This particular one is designated to start based on a particular condition. So in this case, this condition is actually defined as a goal containing the region that this particular process will be associated with. So and the goal is in this case defining all of the different regions that aren't meeting their target number of applicants that they need to be able to have for that particular region. So this condition is going to sit, or this particular activity is going to sit idle until that particular condition is met. When that condition is met, it's going to trigger. Again, it's using goals. It's also using business rules because I've got rules that are also driving what the applicant levels are for the different regions. So a lot of different pieces coming together. But from a process orchestration perspective, I'm just simply using these different objects that have been defined as part of my process.
So again, because every one of these activities and segments, right? So Joby talked about, or snippet, or whatever, depends who you're reading. Every one of these segments or snippets, as well as each individual activity, can be controlled by always wants to run and is going to run as soon as it has the opportunity based on remember precedence, eligibility, and necessity in that order. So what we're going to do is we're creating this section that doesn't have a precedence. It's not waiting for anything else to complete in this case, but it is waiting for certain KPIs to be met, or in this case, fail to be met, right? So I have this thing Joby called a goal. It's a KPI that I'm evaluating. It runs independently of everything else in the system, right? It's a global object. It's asynchronous with any specific process or anything else. And it's periodically evaluating, in this case, my application rates. And it's setting, think of it as sort of a globally scoped data. It's setting this globally scoped data that says, hey, this is the list of regions that aren't meeting my enrollment requirements. Now imagine you have thousands of applicants and you have thousands of these little application instances running for each of those applicants. Each one's going to decide independently whether or not that means it should be doing something. It should be sending an offer off to offer is not a good word because it's confusing. Made a special deal off to the candidate.
Oh, please. So I just added another activity here for this will be assigning, in this particular case, a task to the applicant for this particular process. It'll send them a task, an email notification, and it's going to send them essentially an offer. We'll see what that looks like in just a moment. But this one also I've defined in a needed win condition because this activity is not always going to be needed because if they have already claimed that credit, I may not want to send this again. So this is an example of where I've got a particular activity that'll start under a certain condition, another one that'll only be needed under a certain condition, and then I'm going to define another one that will actually be completed under another condition, and then we'll show some of the other capabilities.
So again, the whole section only starts when when it's needed, but section only starts when it's eligible. It's only eligible when my region is falling behind its KPIs. But that next step is only needed when, so this eligibility is there, but that next step is only needed when when I'm willing to extend an offer to this individual, right? And I'm only willing to do that in this case if I haven't done so in the past, right? I'm not going to send the same person $300 off bookstore offers, a week for 20 weeks until a session closes, until enrollment closes. I may as well just, give 2 textbooks away. I mean, that's insane. You can't do those sorts of things. So Joby's really just configuring that to say, and again, sort of all point and click and what you expect. He's just configuring that to say, this is when these things need to happen. They're all part of that segment. You can see that he's created a precedence requirement for the last step that says, okay, well, this won't be eligible to begin until that precedence has been met. In other words, once we've made the decision and either assigned or not assigned, done that send referral request, then we're going to go and, in this case, we're actually going to wait. Why were we going to wait? Okay, remember that goal, that KPI, is sort of global data that says that which regions aren't meeting their enrollment requirements, right? That information, that status is going to persist until it changes. So I don't want this thing just looping endlessly, which it will because it's constantly going to be eligible. I don't want it looping endlessly and sending offers, every 48 milliseconds because my region is still on the list. So I'm going to go ahead and send an offer, and now I'm going to wait until that KPI changes. I'm going to wait until that region is off the list because this time, I sent him an offer. If they catch up, then great, we're done, and I'll look for the next time. If we fall behind again, and I haven't sent him, and he hasn't filled in an offer before, I'll send him another offer. Does that make sense? Like people follow that logic? Okay, sometimes things make huge sense in my head, and everyone else, has no clue what I'm talking about. And since my wife's here, she'll be happy to confirm that for you.
And actually, on this one, so one of the things that we're just talking about is this particular segment, or what we want to call, whatever you want to call it, is going to start under a particular condition, but you can also establish dependencies with that, meaning I may also want to have some structure around this. I may not want this to occur just the first time that it doesn't meet a particular target. I may also say, maybe I don't want to request a referral until after the SAT scores are evaluated. So I'm going to drag it and drop it on there, establish that dependency, because maybe I don't want to send the referral if to find out the SAT score for this particular applicant to 700. Maybe I don't want his friends to be recommended. So this allows you to add structure to that process as well. So not only will these be triggered based off of some particular condition, but the condition also can be the completion of some other activity within the process, or even some other activity within a different process. So this is the approach that we would go through and just defining the process, making changes to it, and at this point, what I would do is save this, and this is the model. So the model and the executable are very tightly tied together. And we can show you a little bit about what that looks like when it's running. But the interface looks very similar.
So then this is the executable model. I want to talk a little more though about time. So we've talked a little bit about events as drivers and external data changes as drivers and KPIs as drivers. Let's actually look at that evaluate SAT scores section. So I've notionally, in this process, there's a few things going on that are involved sort of the governance of the submission that comes in, right? And one of them is that I want to determine, if something comes in and it looks really good, again, these admissions officers, and for those of you who either work at university or have worked at university or have kids in university, or are yourselves in university, know that the job of the admissions officer is very much a marketing type position in a lot of cases, or even a sales position. So there's a few things I want to know, and one is maybe I want to encourage some students more than others, right? I mean, let's face it. So if you have me applying, 30 plus years ago, I'm sort of at the bottom of the stack, but you have Joby applying, and you want to make sure that you're paying special attention to him. So if I go over the conditions for evaluate SAT scores, so as these applications are coming in, right, they're rolling in, and really I don't have to pay attention to each one individually by itself necessarily, because there are thousands of them. I might have a lot of them to deal with and other things to do. I might want the system to go ahead and help me with some decisioning, and one of the ways is going to be I'm going to have it take a look at SAT scores when they come in. So first of all, what's the precedence requirement? Well, there's no precedence requirement in this case. It's just sitting there waiting for some things to happen. What's the eligibility requirement? The eligibility requirement, again, which is something I'm constantly evaluating. When is this thing going to be eligible? It's going to be eligible when the available documentation contains scores. Like really, as straightforward as that. What are those things? We're going to come back to that in a second, right? We'll dive into those. Okay, great. So when the available documentation includes scores, that means that we can now take a look at the scores. So when the scores arrive, we're going to do this automatically, is the short version of what I'm saying. All right, I'm ready to go when I have the scores. What about the needed one? Well, when am I actually needed? Well, there's some interesting things going on here. Well, I'm needed, but I'm only, I really only, this section of evaluating SAT scores is a review process, right? I'm going to send it to a colleague or the director or something, I forget how we set it up, so that I can get additional feedback on this applicant, because I might want to offer them early admission. I might want to call them up and say, hey, if you can send me this thing by November 15th, we're going to consider you for early admission. But it only makes sense if I'm going to be able to do that in time, right? So here's where some of the really cool time-based or predictive pieces of timeline for, in a case context come in. And this is a great example where I'm only going to, this section, remember, it's now determined that it's eligible, but is it going to run? Am I actually going to run that review process on this candidate? And the answer is only if the predicted completion of this section, right? So this section that I'm in, the evaluate the SAT scores, only if the predicted completion of that, based on how long I know, from my past and what I planned, if that is going to be done no later than the actual deadline, the early action deadline, then I'll kick this off. If it's not, then I don't need it, because I'm not going to be able to review this in time and get the person the thing I need. So there's no use sending somebody a thing on April 21st that says, hey, if you get me something by April 20th, a good thing will happen. That just makes them upset, right? Was that clear? People got that? Okay, good. Yeah, that's good. So let's dive a little bit into the mechanism that makes that happen, just as sort of a way to see how the data model and the orchestration and the case sort of kind of all fit together.
What do you want to?
Do you want to dive into the business value for admissions calendar? Let's start with that. This is what we call business value. And you've heard various variations on this. This is from other speakers, and will continue to. Obviously, it's the best one, but still, so it's something that's familiar to you. This is our data virtualization layer. So we're taking this external data that we're pulling from a SQL data source, which it's okay to show there. Joey's like, did you actually do that, or is it fake? Yeah. So we have a query, that somebody built. Presumably, the person who has the rights over this data built it, and what they're doing is they're publishing that information to the rest of the system for my implementers to be able to use, right? The implementers don't have to have access to this business value definition. In other words, they typically wouldn't be able to change the query or add properties or anything else. I'm publishing a spec, right? I'm publishing this data to the rest of the system, and I'm publishing it as these properties, right? So I'm doing query, and I'm finding out the date, and the number. It's very common with these things. You also want to find out how many were returned, so you can make some decisions there. and so on. So I have a lot of options there. I can do it via web service. I can do other things. So I have a lot of ways to go ahead, get external data, and then virtualize that inside the product, publish it, ignore the way that the data was accessed in the implementations themselves. So if tomorrow I'm getting this calendar not from that database anymore, but I'm getting it from another database or an application or something else, I just change that in one place here, and obviously all the implementations remain unchanged, right? We all know what virtualization is. Note that in this case also I want to tell it, I give the user the opportunity. If you sort of look, yeah, you probably can't see at the bottom there, I know, because of the screen. If you're short and if you're tall and in the front, can you duck for a moment? Okay. I'm going to pass along, I'm going to say, you know, I'm asking this business value for a date, and the question is, you know, for which event and which school, right? So for example, if I have an early admissions deadline for the computer science school, right, what is that date? Right, so it's parameterized and it's virtualized. That means that back in that step, and we can go back to that activity, back in that activity configuration, I didn't need to know all the fancy stuff about how that was getting. I just said, yeah, if the date is you know, no later than that date, the early action date. Same thing with start when, start when, which is the eligibility. So I don't have to worry about, you know, whether or not this will complete on time until I'm ready to start. So I'm going to go ahead and look and determine first, excuse me, in terms of eligibility, I'm going to go ahead and determine first, you know, do I even have the person's scores? Again, this is just another example of where one of those business values is being used to determine if I got scores in from the outside. And if I did, then I know I'm eligible to run. Is there anything else we're dying to show? Because we only have a certain amount of time for questions.
Maybe just to touch on some of the interface. So, because there was a question that came up yesterday as far as what does the user actually see? That's also an important part of the application. One of the components is identifying what the user sees, what that UX is, what their experience is. So it's done through our integrated form builder. So the form builder allows you to be able to control what type of information you want to solicit, what type of information they see. So the way that you're going to control that is through defining what the visual aspects of the form are, all of the different behaviors of it. So I'm going to, for a moment here, I'm just going to say this particular one is required. What I'm going to do is this happens to be the refer a friend form. So this is the form that the applicant would receive that would say, go refer a friend. What I want to actually do is I want to make sure they don't submit an email that already has been submitted. So this is an example of where I may use the same types of business values that I was using within the process. I may actually use those within the context, in this case, for validation on the form, because here I may want to say I want to make sure that the let's do applicant lookup. I'm going to say I want to do an applicant lookup. I want to pass an email address, and the email address is going to be picked up from the form, and that's going to be the friend's email address that they enter. And I'm going to say if that applicant lookup that comes back has more than a single element. So basically, I'm just asking, does that exist? And then I'll have it put a message, this already is an applicant. So this is an example where I can use the same types, the same goals, business values, rules, the objects within the system to be able to control behaviors of the form, what's visible, not visible, enabled, disabled, and including also what validation. So on this particular one, we'll see if I typed this incorrectly. So if I typed it incorrectly, if I were to put one in that already exists, I'll get an error. If I put one in that doesn't already exist, then I'll get something different. So on here, I'm going to say, let me submit this with, I put a name in. So I'm going to submit this. This one's telling me the friend's email address is already an applicant, and if I do something else, gives me no error. So a very simple example, but just to give you an idea of how I'm using those same objects, those same building blocks that may have been created by me or by somebody else within the organization. I'm using those in the, not just the process orchestration and building, but as well as the UI, as well as even when we move into things around the reporting and the charting and the searching, those same things can be used as well there.
Yeah, so again, the other 11 and a half hours of this discussion, I'm happy to have at any time. But for now, thank you very much. Are there questions? Direct them to Joby. Thank you.